Hey guys, Dozer here, bringing you a video about Prism's mechanics to try and help newer players understand the rulings and the mechanisms that are going on behind the scenes that make all of our various cards and interactions function. So hopefully this will give you some insight into how to play the deck better and to not get caught flat-footed when you're in the middle of a tournament. So this episode is going to be talking about auras. Auras are a big part of Prism's game plan. She relies heavily on cards like her Light Illusionist auras that have Spectra, as well as the Light Illusion or the Illusionist token, Spectral Shield, which synergizes with both some of our other auras as well as the various Illusionist weapons. So, what is an aura? Well, auras are cards in Flesh and Blood that stay on the field unless a certain condition removes them, such as Soul Shackle. Soul Shackle is an aura that stays on the field forever. Once it comes onto the field, there is no condition that removes it, so every turn it will have its effect trigger, and it will stay there unless something else removes it. However, there are other auras that remove themselves from play. Cards like Chains of Eminence fall into this category, where at certain points in the game they will trigger and destroy themselves. In Chains of Eminence case, it destroys itself at the start of your next turn. So it basically stays in play for a full turn, and then it removes itself afterwards, unlike Soul Shackle. And then there are other ones that stay in play until a condition is met that's not on a timer. So Spectral Shield will stay around until you receive damage. And so auras can have all these different types of triggers that determine when they do or do not leave the field. In our case, we are mainly concerned with Spectral Shield and the Light Illusionist auras. So Prism's unique auras are Light Talent Illusionist class cards that can each be played at instant speed. That is, they can be played at any point where the Prism player has priority. These cards include things like Genesis, Arclight Sentinel, Ode to Wrath, Merciful Retribution, and Parable of Humility. But in this demonstration, we're just going to be focusing on these auras, because these are some of the more complicated ones. Each of Prism's Light Illusionist auras have the keyword Spectra, and Spectra reads, "This aura can be attacked. When this aura becomes the target of an attack, destroy it and close the combat chain. The attack does not resolve." In other words, these auras stay on the field until targeted by the opposing hero with either a weapon, attack action, or an ally attack to destroy the aura. These auras tend to be unassuming when played by themselves, but if you can manage to get multiple on the field at once, they synergize heavily with each other and lead to multiplicative value, which can snowball a game out of control in your favor. The reason that Spectra is not too big of a weakness is how it interacts with the mechanics of combat in the game. If you target a card with Spectra with an attack of any kind, Spectra's trigger effect will activate and will attempt to resolve. It will attempt to destroy itself and then close the combat chain. When an aura with Spectra is destroyed, it goes to the graveyard by default, and from there the combat chain is closed. This preemptive closing of the combat chain and the added text of "the attack does not resolve" helps to tell us that effects that are part of the attack do not apply. For example, if I have one action point and target your Genesis with my head jab, Genesis's Spectra will trigger and destroy itself. Because head jab has Go Again, you might think that you can attack once more. However, Go Again is an effect on the card which grants you an action point, because the combat chain is closed immediately upon target declaration. And because the attack doesn't resolve, head jab does not get to the point in the resolution of the combat chain to where it would resolve its Go Again, meaning that you will be left with 0 action points. Alternatively, let's say you start by using your action to destroy a time snap potion you control. You then gain 2 action points. You spend one of those to play a head jab by attacking a Genesis. The Genesis destroys itself, and the combat chain closes without resolving the attack. However, because you had an extra action point, you may still attack with your Harmonized Kodachi that you might have. This interaction is especially important for the card Arclight Sentinel, which forces the opponent to target it. A key interaction for Prism's auras are the fact that when you play an attack action card or you declare an attack with a weapon, you must choose the target of that attack once that card is played or the attack is declared. So let's say if I have these cards in my hand and you decide to attack me, if I play Arclight Sentinel in response to you attacking me by pitching my 3 yellows here, my Arclight Sentinel will resolve after the attack is declared, meaning that the target of the attack is still me. The Arclight Sentinel will then not absorb the attack, and then I will take whatever damage that I would have taken from the resulting combat chain. Then if the opponent wants to attack the Arclight Sentinel, the next attack that they declare must target it. And that's just one example of how this target declaration matters for Prism. Another key interaction for Prism's auras are the interactions with Merciful Retribution. This one is probably the most complicated aura that Prism has access to because it has a lot of foundation in the mechanics of the game that people don't normally have to deal with. Trigger effects and destruction of things and various timing windows normally aren't that big of a deal for characters like Bravo, for Dorinthia, for Katsu. I mean, these were some of the original characters, and so their mechanics are very straightforward. However, for Prism, we started to have to learn more about the core mechanics of the game to answer some questions about these cards. For instance, Merciful Retribution reads, if an aura you control or an attack action card you control would be destroyed, deal 1 arcane to the opposing hero or to a target hero. And if the destroyed card was a non token light card, it goes to your soul. So there are a couple very key interactions that happen with this card that people get wrong a lot that I'll explain now. The first one is that if your opponent attacks you directly while you have, let's say, 2 HP, and let's say you have a number of spectral shields in front of you, like let's say you have 3 spectral shields, Merciful Retribution in play, and your opponent is attacking you with a Raging Onslaught. If your opponent's attacking you with a 7 attack card and you have 4 HP, you're blocking 3 of the damage, and so you'll take 4 damage. But if they are at 3 HP, would the arcane damage from Merciful Retribution kill them before you die? The answer is no, because the spectral shields are a replacement effect. The way this interaction happens is they attack you for lethal damage with a card. You cannot prevent the lethal damage in that attack. So when they deal the damage, 3 of your spectral shields are destroyed, but you've already been dealt the 4 other damage through that, bringing your life to 0. Then, when these destroy themselves by taking the damage, Merciful Retribution then tries to trigger and deal the arcane to kill the opposing hero. However, because you've already taken the damage and gone down to 0 life, the game has been decided and the Merciful Retribution does not change the outcome of that. You still lose as the person being attacked for lethal damage through spectral shields with Merciful in play. That is a very key ruling that you have to make sure you remember in these really tense late game scenarios. Another core ruling that comes up a lot is if your opponent declares an attack against an aura with Spectra that you control. So let's say you have a Genesis in play at the during your opponent's turn. And let's say you have no Merciful Retribution in play, but let's say it's in your hand and you have the resources to pay for it. We'll say this is in my hand for right now. If the opponent plays a card to attack your Genesis, then do you have the ability to activate Merciful Retribution in response to make that card pop, dealing 1 arcane and going into your soul? The answer is yes, you can. The reason is because of the way that chain links resolve in this game. So if someone plays the Raging Onslaught card, targeting Genesis for an attack, the Spectra keyword on Genesis will attempt to trigger, putting its ability to kill itself on the stack of, on the chain, right? It becomes a layer. In response to that, you, as the turn player or as the person with priority, can then activate the instant Merciful Retribution by paying its cost of 4 resource. So let's say we paid a yellow and a blue to pay for that. We would be able to play this card, assuming no other cards or things change. We'll resolve it from top down. So the Merciful Retribution will come into play. The Spectra trigger will resolve, destroying the card. Then, because Merciful Retribution was in play when the card was destroyed, it will trigger, causing the 1 arcane to be dealt to the opposing hero and having the Genesis go to soul instead of the graveyard. This is a very key interaction as well because there are a lot of times where at the start of your opponent's turn, the first thing they're going to do is attack your aura. And so being able to get that extra little value of the soul trigger for your Vestige of Soul, as well as the arcane damage for potential lethal, is extremely valuable. And another key ruling in regards to Merciful Retribution is in relation to how it affects itself. So if you have a Merciful Retribution in play, and I attack it with the Genesis, and you have no other auras, does Merciful Retribution affect itself? Would it deal 1 arcane and send itself to soul? The answer is yes, it does affect itself. Now this is harder to explain via the rules because this was a interaction explicitly laid out in the release notes for Monarch and is likely to be cleaned up in future versions of the comprehensive rules. But if you think about it this way, it makes a lot of sense. So if I target the Merciful Retribution with Genesis and try and attack it, it will trigger the Spectra and it will attempt to destroy itself. Because Merciful Retribution is in play while it's trying to destroy itself, it will deal the 1 arcane and then change the destination that it's going to when it then removes itself, going to soul. While that's not the best explanation, that's the closest thing we've got until the comprehensive rules are updated. But just remember that it is an explicit ruling that Merciful Retribution affects itself, and that if it's attacked, it goes to soul and deals the 1 arcane. Another key topic in relation to auras involves the card Arclight Sentinel, which we've already discussed. Which, just to refresh, is that if you are attacked or an attack action is declared, you cannot redirect that attack to the Arclight Sentinel in response. You have to play the Arclight Sentinel before any attack targets are declared. So now that we've talked about the Spectras, that's basically everything important that we have to talk about with them. Now we can talk about the weapons, the illusionist weapons. There are 2 of them, as we know. There is Luminaris and the Iris of Reality. Both of these cards turn your auras, your illusionist auras, into weapons that have various stats. So, for instance, Iris of Reality turns your auras into a 4 attack weapon that costs 3 to activate, that has go again, while Luminaris turns all your auras into 1 attack weapons that attack for free. Basically, these cards have some key interactions in the way that they interact with weapons that don't really apply to most other weapons. So for instance, if we take a look at how spectral shields work when you take damage. So let's say that I'm attacking you with a spectral shield for 1 using Luminaris. If I activate, or if you are attacking me with this card, and I activate the card Steelblade Shunt, I'm blocking a weapon attack, and so I will deal 1 damage to you. Because Spectral Shield will absorb that damage, the card is going to be destroyed. Now, if you pitched a yellow in order to give that Spectral Shield go again, does that Spectral Shield keep the go again after being destroyed? The answer is no. If the Spectral Shield, which is the source of the attack effect, is destroyed during the combat chain by the effect of something like a defense reaction, like Steelblade Shunt, or by arcane damage dealt by Merciful Retribution, that card's go again will not resolve, and the combat chain will close. Or rather, the combat chain will close, therefore the go again does not resolve. This is really important for the mirror match for Prism, and when you're playing against classes that can do damage to you on your turn, for that very reason. So be very careful when you are attacking with Spectral Shields, because if your opponent can break them while you're attacking, you could forfeit your entire turn. So be sure to keep that in mind. Another interaction is that, by the way, you can find that ruling in the Comprehensive Rules section 20.1.1. The next interaction we're going to talk about is the interaction with weapons and when they are considered weapons. So when we read the card Luminaris and Iris of Reality, they specifically mention the action phase. And not just the action phase, but your action phase, as the person controlling the Luminaris. Therefore, if you control a Spectral Shield during your action phase, you have a weapon in play. However, during the beginning phase of your turn and the end phase of your turn, this is no longer considered a weapon. This primarily matters when we're talking about the card Glisten. Glisten reads, that you distribute X plus 1 attack counters among any numbers of weapons that you control. Depending on the pitch, this could be 4, 3, or 2. At the beginning of your end phase, remove all plus 1 counters from weapons you control. This card is key for understanding the phases of a player's turn, because Prism is one of the few classes that has many instances which need to be resolved correctly. Basically, because the auras you control are no longer weapons during your end phase, you do not remove the plus 1 attack counters from the auras themselves. However, if you had put counters onto Luminaris itself, those would be removed during the end phase. Now that we've talked about that, we can talk a bit more about priority and phases, which is again something very important for Prism. A player cannot gain priority unless they are in the action phase. This is one of the most core rules of Flesh and Blood's core mechanics, and this really matters especially when we're playing Genesis. So if you want to play Genesis and resolve its start of turn effect, you have to play it during your opponent's turn. And that means that you might wait for them to attack you, and then you might play Genesis after they've attacked to make sure that you have a chance to get it down on their turn so that when your turn comes around, you can use the Genesis to start activating its effect. However, if your opponent, let's say they're playing Prism, right? Let's say I'm playing Prism with Luminaris, and you have a Genesis that you want to play. Let's say that I've attacked you this turn with one of my other Spectral Shields. I have a yellow in my pitch. Let's say I have this Arclight Sentinel in my pitch, and I've attacked you with one Spectral Shield on this turn, and I have one Spectral Shield I have not attacked with. If I then say I pass priority to you, you can then say, sure, I'd like to play Genesis from my hand. So you play the Genesis by paying for its cost, and then I now have priority as the turn player again. I can then use my extra Spectral Shield to attack your Genesis and destroy it. Now you might think, oh, well, I'll just wait for their end phase to play Genesis so they can't attack it. Well, you can't do that. And as I just said, you cannot gain priority unless you're in the action phase. Therefore, no cards can be played during the end phase or the start of turn phase, which means if you want to play Genesis during your opponent's turn, you have to play it during the action phase, which means if your opponent has an extra action point and the ability to attack, you are at risk of losing your Genesis immediately once you play it. However, if you've seen the person attack with everything they have no more attacks, no more floating, then you would be safe to play Genesis during their action phase before they Arsenal, because Arsenal happens during the end phase. And then you'd be able to resolve Genesis as you intended. Let's see here. That seems to be everything I wanted to cover today as far as auras. We covered how Spectral Shields work in conjunction with Glisten. We covered how they function in terms of taking damage and losing go again. We talked about how the targeting system works for Arclight Sentinel. We talked about priority and start of turn triggers and what you can play during which phase. We talked about Spectra in general. And we talked about how Merciful Retribution affects itself, how you can play it in response to a Spectra being targeted and still get it to apply to that. And we also talked about receiving lethal damage through Spectral Shields while Merciful Retribution is up. We talked about how Spectra interacts with action points versus go again. And so I believe we've covered every topic I wanted to cover today in regards to Prism, auras, Spectras, and weapons. So thank you very much for watching. I hope this helped clear up some questions for you. Please feel free to refer back to this video in the future to make sure that you can answer any rulings questions you might have to think of. And keep a lookout for the next video where I discuss some more Prism tips and tricks. Thanks for watching. Peace.